Hi everyone, my name is Amir Tibon. I'm the Washington correspondent for Haaretz newspaper. It's great to be here in this panel with the wonderful group that we have with us. I'll introduce our panelists and the missing panelist who is on her way in a minute. Before we start the discussion, there are two general comments I want to make. One is that we are a bit behind schedule, so we will try to be a bit brief, and I might be rude to some of the panelists. Please, the panelists and the crowd, understand that this is part of the requirements of my job today and not because I don't like you or my members here on the stage. And the second thing I want to say is, everyone, please put your cell phones off or in quiet mode so that the little time that we do have will not be wasted on having noises coming from cell phones in the crowd. As we are waiting for one more panelist, I will start by introducing the ones that are here with me on the stage. And we will build up the momentum as the time goes by. The headline of our panel today is The Choices Ahead. We're going to look at the issues that are dominating the public discourse in Israel that might be on top of the agenda in the upcoming election. I can tell you that as an Israeli journalist working in this city, I get the question, when is the next election in Israel? About 3 or 4 times a week from people, and I always tell them I have no idea. You cannot be a prophet on this issue. It might be decided a week from today, or it might take place on the original time, which is November of next year. But we will talk not about when the election will happen, but when it does, what will be the issues that everyone will be speaking about, what will make the difference between the blocs and the parties. And there's a lot of smart people here on the stage that will give you the, I think, fascinating perspective on this issue. So we have Bar Gissin. Bar is the national chairperson of Young Meretz and the founder of Mekomi, the local leadership movement in Israel. She's director of Students for Workers, a program at the General Union of Workers in Israel, and coordinator of the Coalition for Democracy in Education and Civics. She is a master's student at Tel Aviv University, and she's writing her thesis on the political history of the Hadash party. So that sounds interesting. Hadassah. Oof, my mistake. Yeah, yeah, well, close enough. Okay, that sounds like a good thesis in itself. Now we have Michael Manekin next to her. He is the Israel director of the Alliance for Israel's Future, a consortium of donors and organizations focused on building new progressive political leadership in Israel. He's also the former CEO of Molad, which is a non-partisan think tank, progressive think tank in Jerusalem. And before that, he directed Breaking the Silence, and he co-founded Mahapach, progressive caucus operating within the Labour Party, and manages Israel Tomorrow, a strategic communications company. Any mistakes on this one? Okay, apologies, Bar. And Uri Keidar, on my right, he joined Israel Chofshit as the executive director of these organizations last summer. Before this role, he spent over 7 years in leading positions in civil society organizations and in politics in Israel, both in the elected and professional positions. And he served in the military as a tank commander and still does reserve duty Miluim, and also used to work for a period in J Street in Israel. We are missing still Samach Salaime, and when she arrives, I think I will introduce her to the crowd. She's also going to be a great panelist with us today. But I think as we await for her to join us, we will just hop into the discussion. I'm going to ask some general questions to our panelists and leave a lot of time for you and all your important and smart questions, which will be much better than mine, so we'll try to get to it fast. The first question I wanted to present to all our panelists here, as we look ahead into the possibility of new elections in Israel, and like I said, it could be any day. Right now, one issue that's really dominating the headlines in Israel and is affecting the entire political system is corruption. We're seeing a never-ending stream of news stories about corruption investigations involving Prime Minister Netanyahu, some of his coalition partners, people in a number of parties. And I want to ask you, as an opening general question, do you think Israeli voters really care about corruption? Is it really a game-changing issue in our politics? Let's move from Michael through Bar to Uri and hear their perspective.
Okay, could this work? I mean, it depends on when you say the Israelis care about corruption, what do we mean? No, I don't think Israelis vote on corruption. I don't think it's a top issue, and definitely in terms of polling in the past, when we poll why Israelis vote for what they vote for, corruption is usually a very low issue in terms of importance and in terms of priorities. But I do think it matters in terms of how a camp tells a story about itself. So I don't think it's going to be an election topic in that it creates. I mean, I think everybody's going to say this at some point or another. We don't really know. We're at the end of the day, we're activists.
Best answer in this kind of panel.
we're activists. We're not pundits. But I think. Corruption tells a story of a camp or tells a story of a type of leadership, so it's definitely a good auxiliary force or tool. I don't think it's something that usually ends up being the central issue of election. I don't think it'll be the central issue of the election now. I do think, and this will also sort of point at the direction or the things that are important for me to say in this panel, I do think it's a very comfortable issue specifically for a lot of the opposition leaders, because it's an issue where they don't need to make clear identity choices about themselves. So at least in the perceived notion of our, I think, rather subpar opposition leadership right now, it's a good way to divert the conversation to issues which are less important and to feel you're talking about something important.
I think you all have microphones, right? Okay.
Yeah, okay. So I want to follow up on Michael, because basically I agree with you. I think corruption won't be, the changing point or the issue that's going to dominate next elections, or people will choose according to it. How will they vote? I can say confidently, unfortunately, from my own mother party, Meretz, which has always the image, and it is also the most transparent and most, honorable or clean-handed party in the parliament, and we are the smallest one in the parliament. So it must not be the most important issue, but I do think that it is a platform for us progressives and the Israeli left camp to join forces and engage others in our fight. It's a great, let's say, excuse for people to hear what we have to say. We saw rallies of tens of thousands of people going every week to the streets. Suddenly seeing partnership in the left parties and not alienating from us or avoiding any connection with us, which is a good and gradual change from rallies we could see before, the 2011 rallies or the gas, how do you call it? The natural gas issues 2 years ago. So yeah.
I'll say, first of all, I think that it will be a topic. I don't know if it will be the topic. But I want to ask, if that's okay, I want to ask the audience a question. Do you remember what was the first thing that the Likud campaigned about in the previous elections in 2015? The first thing, their first ad, their first, yes.
I'm going to take a wild guess, but I assume it's had something to do with Operation Cast Lead.
No. So the first thing that they campaigned about was governance. It lasted for about, I think, 72 hours. And then they switched because they understand that it's sorry for the word, a shitty topic. And they switched. And I think that one of the things that it is important, because I do think that corruption moves people. I'll later quote a few people that I think agree with that. Is that I think that the interesting thing, as Michael already said, is it might be a starting point, but I think the more important and the more relevant question that we will need to see is where do we head from there, because we will not have a 90 days elections campaign all driven around corruption. I do want to mention that I think that in '92 that was one of the major topics that Labour ran on and eventually won. So I do think that it is an electoral issue in Israel.
Okay, and we have Samach, who just joined us, so I will introduce her, and then she will have the privilege of answering the question as well. Samach Salman is a member of Wahat Salam, Neve Shalom, which is a very special community in Israel. If you're visiting anytime soon, I strongly encourage you to go and see it. An Arab-Jewish community built on equality and peace. She heads the Communications and Development Department in Neve Shalom. She's a social worker, a community activist, a feminist, a blogger. She frequently writes for a 972 magazine on the issues of the Palestinian-Israeli relationship. She's the founder of Arab Women in the Center, an NGO which is active in the cities of Ramle, Lod, and Jaffa, combating violence against women, particularly in the Arab society. And this year, she was chosen by Yediot Acharonot, an Israeli newspaper, as one of the 10 most influential social activists in Israel. Yes, well deserved. And the question we were discussing is how much do you think corruption is going to have an influence on the upcoming election? And I will add another subsequent question. You know, if this is not a main issue, as our three other panelists said, what could be a main topic that maybe we're not thinking about right now that could dominate the conversation?
Well, thank you for the question. I will be encouraged to represent the Arab population inside Israel. This is the only thing the Israeli politics cannot accuse the Arab citizen in, the corruption. We are not in the government. We are not part of what's happening in the government. And for 70 years, the Arab parties were in the opposition. So we don't have this kind of history, which is good. This is a good start. And I want to mention here that we, in the current government, we have convicted Minster, who was in jail for corruption, and he's now one of the leaders of the Shas party, and he is a very powerful and influential minister. What's concerned me about the corruption, and that I think that it will be part of the campaigns, and if Meretz and the Zionist party do their job well and cooperate together, I think that this issue have to be on the table. I do believe that what concerned me, okay, as a citizen of Israel, as a Palestinian, is the normalization of the corruption in the Israeli society. That we hear journalists, we hear leaders who mention and speak up to Bibi Netanyahu, says like it's about cigarettes, it's about small money, it's not the big issue, it's nothing next to the threat from Iran and Syria, and what's happening is like the small thing is happening. It's not millions of dollars, and the public start to accept that this is not a big issue, this is a small thing, and we have to live with this thing. And for me, I think that the next election will be mostly about the legalization of the settlements of the West Bank, what the right-wing campaign want to do and start already to prepare the Israeli society to that part. They are now legalizing the justice system, the transportation, the higher education, and step by step we will see ourselves dealing with this issue. Hopefully the next election will come before that dramatic moment.
Thank you, Samach. And I want to encourage our panelists, within the time constraints that I mentioned, also if you want to respond to each other, but very briefly, because again, we don't have a ton of time. And the next question I want all of you to think about, and Michael, you will have the privilege of starting. Are we going to see any new political combinations emerge? Do you think that's something that is likely, or maybe even something we should aspire to? There's been discussion over the years about how to solve the problem of the left in Israel through, joining forces between different parties. Should Meretz run with the joint list? Should the joint list break up into two parties? Should Labour break up or incorporate Meretz or make a bond with Lapid? What are your views on these issues?
I could talk about something that won't happen that I want to happen.
Well, that's always a start.
But I think, but maybe in order to do that, I'll talk about first about something. I'll do it all quickly, but something that I think will happen that I don't want to happen, and that is, first of all, I think it needs to be clear that all of this is fuzzy, because there's one thing that we know for sure, and that there will be new parties in the political system in the next year. We know the beginnings of them. So any conversation, and there'll be new people running for prime minister who are not in our head right now. So all of the conversation that we have about political parties and political constellations, we need to take with a grain of salt, because we don't know the full spectrum yet. So I know at least of two parties which are being discussed. They tend to be centrist parties, but we'll wait and see how things develop. I think the dominant theory today among sort of center-left leadership is that there needs to be a wide centrist coalition. That's sort of the fantasy of the center-left, and it's been the fantasy for a very, very long time. So we're talking about a coalition, pragmatic coalition somewhere between Meretz and Lieberman. And I know for at least some of those, for us, that doesn't seem like a very moderate leadership, but I think that's a fantasy that a lot of sort of thought leaders in the center left have, where you would have somebody like Yair Lapid running the party. Just he's the biggest party right now and the most important candidate. That's been the dominant theory in the Labour Party for a very, very long time. I think the problem with it is it consistently fails. It's actually consistently failed for the last 40 years. It's mathematically very, very problematic. And the main problem with that fantasy is that the center doesn't share the fantasy of the left, meaning the left is sure that Yair Lapid will join them because it's somehow similar. And Yair Lapid, and it's important to say this in this room, has been saying consistently for the last year that his first phone call to build a coalition will be the Likud and not Labour, and he's been saying that consistently, and it's something that we should think about. But I do think that'll happen. I think it won't succeed, and maybe this time around it'll be the last time it'll happen. It won't succeed. What I would like to see happen in general is an open conversation between the Zionist left, or liberal Zionists, or however it's called in these constellation, and at least those parties relevant in the joint list who want to see a political alliance. I'm not talking about a joint party because I think that's irrelevant, and I'm not necessarily even talking about a joint coalition because that's never existed, but a support from the outside from Palestinian-Israeli parties. And it is worth mentioning that the only time the left has been in power in the last 40 years has been due to support of Palestinian citizens of Israel. And when I say Zionist left, I mean the Labour Party and Meretz, but if those parties ever want to see themselves in a position of power, that means we need to be, as the majority and as the ones with more power in the room, we need to be focused on stretching out our hands, both ideologically and also pragmatically, towards Palestinian citizens of Israel, because it's good ideology, but it's also good politics. And I think that should be sort of the trajectory that we're focused on.
Okay. I'm going to challenge this question and try to broaden my answer, because I think that asking questions only about the structure of parties, of national parties, is not a good enough answer, because the Israeli left is in a crisis. I'm betting most of you know it, feel it, or heard about it. And there's a question we have to ask ourselves, which is at the beginning of the process we have to go through, which is we see populist right, nationalist right wing rising all over the world, and we see the weakening of, kind of the bases of the left parties all around the world. We see how their bases, the labor parties all worldwide, are losing their traditional voters. And what we should ask ourselves is, what is the alternative we are suggesting, we are giving to the voters when we want to have them with us, either in Meretz, Hadash, Labor, whatever. And I think the answer to this question should be that there needs to be a new agreement, a new treaty between the public and its representatives. And it has to come from bottom up. And you kind of mentioned it in my bio. For the last year, I've been dealing with building power from bottom up through local communities and local municipalities, because we keep up, this panel, it talks about the elections, and we tend to neglect the fact that within 6 months, less than 6 months from now, there's going to be elections in 250 municipalities nationwide. There's going to be elected 1,600 city council members who are going to affect the lives of each and every Israeli. And we should ask ourselves, how do we build power there? How do we reach people in their day-to-day lives, in life itself? And it should be from bottom up all the time, because Israeli politics is built so, top down in its parliamentary system that we have to break it apart. We have to remind people that behind our values, pluralism, equality, freedom, whatever, there's people and there's faces and there's people who are committed to this process and they are willing to represent them in the best way possible, which is much better than the right wing. And I think this is the real question we should ask ourselves.
This is, I'm sure, to some of the people in the crowd, brings up the kind of discussions that are going on in the United States about should we talk about 2020 or focus all the attention on 2018 before that? And that's an interesting comment. Uri, I want to challenge you a little bit as you grapple with the same question, because your organization deals a lot with religious issues in Israel, religious pluralism, freedom from religious coercion from the state and the rabbinate. Do you think that could be a major issue that could somehow influence how we look at the political map, maybe create new coalitions, new partnerships, affect the election results? So make a stab at that, please.
Okay, I will say something which might start from a different point than what you just asked. I know one thing for sure. I know that both Netanyahu and his political partners do not want elections to be around religion and state. And the reason that I know that is not because they told me so, it's because they're saying it out loud publicly. I'm not sure if people in this room have read in September 2017, your newspaper published a series of interviews with 4 Likud leaders, sort of up-and-coming leaders from Likud. One of them is David Bitan. David Bitan was formerly and was then the coalition whip. And he said that, according to his theory, votes move from right to left on 2 issues. One is corruption, as we mentioned earlier, and apparently he was involved in that himself, or at least
that was a personal observation for him.
Yeah, and maybe back then he was not still arrested. Okay,
processing.
Yeah, and the other thing that he said is that they might lose votes over Israel of the religion state, and 6 months later, in the latest coalition crisis that we have, and I know that it's hard to follow our coalition crises, it seems as if that's an ongoing process, they signed a new coalition agreement, and under that coalition agreement, Netanyahu demanded and received an authorized, signed agreement in which all the coalition parties decide not to move forward with anything that has to do with religion and state until they dissolve the coalition completely, which means up to the next elections. The reason for that is that they understand that that is probably the only topic in which they cannot find solutions, and that drives people in Israel to the streets. We saw that, and every time, I need to get over it, but every time that I say in English that the closest vote that we had under the current coalition has to do with who has the authority to open grocery stores on Shabbat. It sounds idiotic to me, but that's actually the fact. And I think that what we understand is that my political analysis is that if someone wants to win elections, they should try and have those elections around the topics that their opponents does not want the elections to go through. So I do think that it's an electoral issue.
Okay, and I think that most of you don't know what's happening in the inside politics in the Arab society, and that because we are, for the most media or the mainstream media in Israel, what's happening in the joint parties is not that important, and it's not irrelevant because they don't really see Arab politician part of this system. And I think that for me as an activist is fascinating to see the moves. Like, it's very slow, but the moves in the and I consider myself as the left winger, and I do search for coalitions and partners and potential partners, but I just agree with you that the joint party is not running again. I think that they don't have any choice, that because they love each other, because they both attacked by, all of them attacked by Netanyahu and Lieberman, and they don't have any chance to be in the Knesset without being together. I think that the next election they will be much more mature and pragmatic and wise to sign agreement with the Meretz for the remains of the votes. I think that for me as a feminist, for example, I don't know if you know, but the Islamic movement, for example, election or the primaries in the Islamic movement 3 months ago approved the third chair for female, so we will see the first Muslim woman in the Knesset. This is my optimistic scenario. This is what they promised me, at least, and I believe that they will be afraid from the response of the feminist movement in Israel if they don't. And I do think that because I know that a lot of Jewish post-Zionists, let's see, if I can use that term, are looking for partnership. Thabit Abu Ras and other people are involved in this new initiative, new movement to establish Arab Jewish left party. I don't know where is that going to happen. We will see. We have a meeting next May, so I will post, my next article maybe will be about that. So just follow 972 and I will update.
And we will wait for the update. Thank you. Now we are talking about political changes that are happening in Israel, and I'm sure for you and many other people who are interested in Israel and care about Israel, that's a main priority. At the same time, of course, there are fascinating political changes taking place here in Washington and generally in the United States. And I want to ask our panelists, if you see any kind of spill effect from the United States to Israeli politics, or maybe vice versa, how events that are happening here with Trump and his style of politics, with the democratic resistance, with the never Trump Republicans, things like that, if you think they have any effect on our political discourse in Israel, if there's any connection between the things. So, Michal, you want to start? Or?
But then I don't get to hear what the other people say before I make up my mind.
The last question will go from Samah to you.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely on the right, and I think in terms of, I think the challenge of the amount of craziness coming out from all over the world in every day is it gets you callous. And I think this was true. This was said about the corruption issues, that it's even for very sort of involved Israelis, it's already at this point very hard to follow the corruption crisis. And I imagine that's similar here, that when twice a day you're getting new information, you just can't do it anymore. And that energy that you need in order to mobilize and to write and to organize is just much harder to use when every day something is happening. I think that's also true of activism, but it's also true of the press. And it's a very natural response. And I think the second maybe tragic element of that is I don't think progressives anywhere, including Israel, have learned yet how to deal with this new right-wing populism. I don't think we have good answers for it. I look to other places, to the U.S., to other places to see what are progressives doing, what is the left doing here, what are progressives doing there, to try to get hope out of that or to try to be inspired. I'm actually a bit cautious of the resistance models because over time, when you lose enough, you become disillusioned and you actually self-marginalize. I understand why it comes, and I've definitely been involved in it and probably will be involved in resistance models in the future. But there's also a challenging element of that. So in this point of time, I think ideologically, and at least like in terms of like theoretically and ideologically, I think it's a challenging time. And I know one thing for sure, and that is that we don't have yet sort of the real response to how to deal with that. So that might be sort of tragic in the short term, but I don't think anybody has yet sort of created a language which we know is sticking. So maybe that's sort of like initial thoughts on this issue.
I definitely think that Israel-America relations and the happenings in the government of both countries affect each other. And I see the almost like a competition or a challenge effect between Trump and Bibi, and how radical, how crazy, yeah. Who's going to take the next insane press release? And it definitely, the leash has gotten loose and they're running ahead, which is dangerous, of course, extremely. When there's this kind of bromance, you can only lose from it. But I think it should also be kind of a ray of hope or a sign for us progressives that partnerships can work from both sides, and if you build it right, if you build it on ideology and trust and genuine exchange of knowledge, of know-how and experience, you can really make it a multiplier of your actions. And I see it here in this conference, and I see it on a daily basis in the connections I hold with the JCTU and other international partners we have. I think that most issues we progressives deal and face have to go through international tunnels in one way or another. And the more we will be able to discuss it, not preach, not, patronize on each other, but form a partnership, which requires bravery, because I know that as Israelis do not know how to be organized, and we do not know how to work, Israeli progressive, we do not know how to work in an orderly fashion and how to do partnerships. Michael and I are really good friends for the past, let's say, 2 years. But it couldn't have happened before. Right. Me, a Meretz activist, and Michael, a labor activist, and Uri, the previous chair of Young Labor. This couldn't have happened before. Sitting together, sharing ideas. This is what we need from American Jewry. We need to learn how to cooperate. We need to learn how to be professional. We need to learn how to organize like you guys do. And the only way we can do it is by opening up and being a bit less sarcastic. That's important. But being able to learn, but also being able to sit here and talk with you, just like this opportunity we have here.
I want to start by giving a bad example. I'm going back to a discussion that Bar and I had about 2 campaigns that Meretz ran. One was, I even don't remember what were they trying to say, but they used the hashtag resist, which is nice if you're in another country, where that was the second one. And then they moved to a campaign with hashtag #LockEmUp, again about corruption in Likud, which again is nice if you're first of all, an English-speaking country, which tends to work with English-speaking campaigns. Because if you're doing English-speaking campaigns to Israelis who are talking Hebrew in their daily life, it's antagonistic, and that's the easiest word that I can find for that. I think that we have a lot to learn from the progressive camp here. And I think that the other way around, what we are now seeing, and we saw it, I think around, we had a JSU delegation right after the elections. And for the first time, we had people who sort of clicked the fact that, oh, this is how it happens. Then you lose an elections that you just don't understand. How can you lose? And I think that coming from that point, there is a need, an important need, first of all, to make those cooperations, because they are happening on the conservative side on a very, very broad basis. And I applaud them for that. I must say that I think that the most important thing that we can look to our right and see is that they are working together, they are working professionally, they don't shy away from the fight. And a lot of times we see, as progressive, I'm not that comfortable with that message, and I'm not that comfortable with that campaign, and I'm not sure that that was the exact wording, but excuse me, sir, no one's asking you because it's already out. So please support whatever it is that's happening. And I think that that is probably the best thing that we can learn from our political opponents and apply to our politics.
Okay, so I'm going to say something. Maybe it's not popular, and I have to oppose you all. And first of all, the left winger in Israel learned from the right wingers. Tamar Zandberg hired the most populist campaigner, brutal campaigner. She cooperated with him. She consulted with him, which is offends me as a supporter, as a potential supporter. And I do agree with the techniques that we have to be, or the left wing will have to be more aggressive and more pure and powerful. I do agree for that. I think that in that theme, kind of red line was crossed, and for me it was disappointed. The other thing, I think that we have to open as activists, as citizens, and people who really believe in equality and democracy and freedom, to open the conversation about the determination about the influence of what's happening in the U.S. for what's happening in the Israeli politics. I can see from the side that 8 years of Obama administration don't really affect what happened in Israel. There were Democrats were in charge. Obama was elected twice, and Israel goes left and left and left. And now we have Trump, and it seems like Netanyahu just waited for this wave, for this thing, and now he has like a easy partner, and this is my feeling. And if really what's happened in Obama administration influence what's happened in the politics in Israel, I think that Israel after 8 years should be in different shape. So what's the explanation of this kind of influence? I think that we have to break up this myth and start to think what's really motivate the leaders of inside or the politicians inside the U.S. and inside Israel, and that's why this is the only way that we can figure out and recalculate the ways that or our path or our road. I see, for example, the sudden warming up friendship between regime like Saudi and Arabia Saudi and Israel and the US. It's nothing about values of equality and democracy. We know what the Saudian regime do. And the key word for me, as a Palestinian, as a resident of Israel, as people, as women who I see what's happening, and I think most of the people know that it's about interest, it's about militarism, it's about the upcoming war, it's about the fear that the Saudian regime is controlling his people by the fear of Iran. The same thing that what Bibi Netanyahu is doing. The same thing, the same tool of the right wingers to control us and control our mentality, our emotions, because we have to be afraid of something big that's coming, and they will control us. So I think that if we really want to recalculate our plan of changing the politics, we have to think big. We have to challenge the regional relationship between leaders that think about money and militarism and the industry of war. And the other thing that I do see some similarities in the civil society movement. I see what's happened for the feminist movement here in the US after Trump election. I see what's happened with the asylum seeker struggle inside Israel. I see what's happened here with the gun control. I see what's happened here with the immigration policy and Obamacare and all of kind of civil struggles that suddenly have a space or realize that they have to resist. They have to do something. The same thing happening in Israel, in my point of view, and people find their small battle that they can win in that. So, I think that as a and I really want to believe that we are on the same side of the political map. We have to find out the junctions and the points that we do share values and we do share our beliefs in human rights, democracy, and equality, and fight for those causes. And then the highway for the government will be much more easier for us.
Okay, so on this note of what Samach said, I want to give one more question to Uri and to Bar and to Michael, but very, very brief answers, minutes or more, but that's it. Which is, building on what Samach said, is there one thing that you see right now in Israeli politics that is giving you a sense of hope? Something that, we can look at and be a bit optimistic about, a positive trend that maybe we're not seeing in the headlines so far? So just, a brief answer on that, and then we will open up to questions from the crowd. So Uri, you go first.
So it's not really a recent trend. It's just that, as Bar said, in my one of my previous hats, was the chairperson of the young branch of the Labour Party. And in 2015, Labour, along with Tzipi Livni's movement, formed the Zionist Union and got 24 mandates in one of the weakest campaigns that we had, I think, ever. I could play the game again of asking you, what do you remember from the campaign, but it won't be a fun game because no one remembers. Right.
We've all tried to forget, basically.
Right. So, and Labour got the most votes that it got in decades, and was rather close to winning the elections in a very, very non-strategic and without some kind of a fantastic leadership that we're all sort of looking for. And that made me optimistic because I think that if on those terms we were able to bring a very good result, then it's possible. It's just playing better.
One thing that is kind of my ray of hope in current reality is that I think there's a good and gradual, steady process of growing coalitions between organizations and individuals who you couldn't see before cooperating in Israel. I think that identity politics have ended its job right now in Israeli politics. We do reach a phase that every group is able to identify itself, but then look out and see that whether you're the Arab from Akko, or the gay couple from Ramat Gan, or the Ethiopian from, bless you, the Ethiopian from Kiryat Gat, or the Haredi from Petah Tikva. All of you have the same problem, which is you don't get to rent an apartment because you're being discriminated. You're being discriminated, and you probably also cannot finish the month without your parents' assistance. And you most probably won't have pension, won't have a steady job, because this is reality right now. Because economic reality and the neoliberal system that we live in does not allow us to do so. Because we are being pressured more and more, and we are told that we should hate each other, okay, the ultra-Orthodox and the secular and the Arab and the gay, and as long as we believed it, it worked. But right now there's a new process which allows people to see that despite the different identities, we are all suffering from the same social economic oppressing system that is enforced on us, and this is what we should fight, and this is what I think would.
So, Michael, I promised you would be last, and this is also the moment to encourage everyone to get behind the microphone. It's also good exercise. We need it. So, line up with your questions, and meanwhile, Michael will answer the previous question.
So I'll do it in under a minute, but I want to give 4 examples what have nothing to do with.
Go.
The first is politicization of young people, particularly in Meretz. Meretz got out, Bar's people, the Reds, got out over 8,000, how much? 10,000 registered members to the Meretz Party in the last couple of months, which is unbelievable. Had nothing to do with it, but I think young people being politicized is always a brilliant thing. The second is Palestinian Israeli leadership, which wants partnership with with liberal Zionists, even at a time when liberal Zionists behave the way they do, and particularly Ayman Odeh, which I think is something which we shouldn't be expecting, but I think is unbelievably impressive and unbelievably important. The third is Omdim Beyachad, standing together, and if you haven't seen them up until now, speak to them. I encourage you to do that in the next couple of days, because they're incredible and mobilizing on so many different levels. And the fourth is within the Labour Party, and still relatively small, but the fact that there's an ultra-Orthodox caucus in the Labour Party, particularly of Haredi feminists, is something which we wouldn't have been able to envision 10 years ago, or maybe even 5 years ago, or maybe we can't even envision now. But I think that's awesome, and I think incredible, and I think opens up, also for me as a religious individual, so much options and ideas regarding to what Israel and Judaism can do on a progressive level. So those are 4 examples, I think, in under a minute.
Way to go. With the questions, I will say we don't have time at all, really. So what we're going to do, only short questions, no speeches, no comments, no observations. A question, which is a sentence or 2. I'm going to write down all the questions and then refer them to the panelists. So we're not going to do question-answer, but rather take it all down and move. So let's go, and let's try to be fast and efficient.
Is this on? Okay.
Yes.
So finally, at the end, you got to what I thought was the point of the what you were going to discuss. What was
That's
advertised.
an observation,
okay,
sir. I apologize.
No. The point is that you're all a bunch of, I don't want to say left-wing losers, but finally you got to the subject matter. There are other people who have issues besides just you all, and they are the ones who have created the majority that is currently governing Israel, and you didn't speak to necessarily their issues and how their issues hit with your issues, except at the very end. So could you please discuss a little bit more about that, so we see a broader perspective than just who's going to cooperate with who, but the real issues and how you're going to win elections on what the real issues are in the street?
Okay, not
Thank
sure
you.
where's the question there, but
we'll
get a try to stab at it. Yes?
I know that, as you've talked about, that most of the center left is talking about a centrist coalition, and I'm just confused as to know why the left isn't really getting together, working with like the Joint List, Meretz, and the Zionist Union, and trying to make like their own left front. Like, I really don't understand why this has to be an obstacle, because to me, I've seen the centrist strategy in the United States, and it's a complete dumpster fire.
So some kind of a larger center-left front, yes?
couple of years ago, what I seemed to hear here was that Israelis were concentrating on the issues that you talked about, the economic issues, housing, cottage cheese, prices, and we're not paying much attention to foreign affairs, for the Israeli-Palestinian thing. Has that changed?
So occupation versus social issues, okay? Yes?
The prevailing notion that you hear in the U.S. is that Bibi wins because of security, and that is the overwhelming concern. How do you envision the opposition effectively countering that argument, or is that really just bogus and what's been created by Bibi constantly? Is it real that that's what the public opinion is and why people sort of fatalistically vote for him, or is it illusionary? And how do you deal
is security really the main issue, and how can we win on it? And then,
that's exactly right.
Yes, ma'am?
I don't have that good a sense of numbers in Israel, and you mentioned the possibility of the power of the potential power of the Israeli Palestinian community, the Israeli citizens, and I'd like to know in terms of voters what the percentages
the Arab
are.
community, its influence numbers.
Yeah.
And then the last question, and we will try to squeeze them in very quickly, but yes.
Can you talk about the expansion of the settlements as a domestic issue, how that's being seen today? Is it a financial, it must be a financial drain?
Yeah, is it some, okay.
Yeah.
Michael, you wanted to take a quick stab at the first gentleman's comment about not talking about the real issues. Right, you said you were interested to say something about that.
No, if I understand, these are the real issues are always security. They're always social economic issues, and they're always issues of civil relations, and they all encompass issues of identity. It's not who I am as an Israeli, and that's something that's manipulated in many different ways. So it's not always about issues even. It's about optimism, pessimism, happy to live in a place, sad to live in a place. I think that's an issue that everybody deals with. All of us are Israelis. We're not outside political people who have ideas, and we have families in Israel. We're dealing with all those things as well. I don't think it's anything sort of out of the ordinary. If anything, I think the Israeli left today is much more consciously aware of different communities. Organizations like Amram weren't mentioned, and even if though they're bipartisan or nonpartisan, still most of the activists are coming from the left on Mizrahi issues, LGBT issues, and so on. So I think we're actually in a very, very good place regarding that. I'll just answer the statistics because somebody asked about statistics. Around 20% of Israelis vote for the center-left parties, 20 to 25. 20% of Israelis vote for center parties. Around 40% of Israelis vote for right parties, and 16% of Israelis are the Palestinian-Israeli voter bloc, because another couple of percent, whenever we talk about 20%, we're usually including Palestinian Jerusalemites who are residents and not citizens and therefore cannot vote in general elections. If you did the math quickly, that means that nobody can build a coalition on their own. Oh, there's 10% ultra-Orthodox. And when I talked about ultra-Orthodox leftists, I wasn't referring to them.
Okay. Okay, Bar, you wanted to talk about the idea of some kind of a left front, the center and the left coming together. Again, very briefly, because we have other questions waiting for other panelists.
Okay. I'll catch up on the Bibi question as well. Bibi won because he had a good methodology and agenda of fear and hatred and putting an axe between people and scaring one sector, unleashing it on to another. The left didn't. The left didn't give a good alternative of hope, a good alternative of what should Israel look like, and this is why we lost. The security issues, as much as they are important, are not as important as to Israelis as they are to Americans, and it's unfortunate to say, but when you sit in a coffee shop in Tel Aviv, you do not feel the occupation. You do not know it exists. You do not know it's there, and it's unfortunate. So this is why I think that our connection, progressives' connection to those atrocities happening on a daily basis has to come from what we feel. And we know that there is a welfare state in Israel, outside Israel actually, in the occupied territories. There is a place where public funding where Israel funds its children and the roads and everything. But it's not in Israel. They don't put this money for us. They don't build the development cities. They don't build the Negev. They don't build the north, because they do prefer to invest in the settlements. And once we realize that this is our interest, that the Israeli government does not care about us, Israelis who are paying their taxes, who live inside the legal state of Israel, this will end once we realize it. Once we realize that this is our economic interest.
Okay, I want to refer to Samach. It's going to be a mashup of two questions. There was a question about creating some kind of a larger front, and then a question about Arab-Israeli participation in the political game. Can the the Joint List and the different Arab parties become part of this broader coalition of some kind of a center-left front, or are the gaps too wide over there? And to Uri, the last question will be about security. Is this something that the center-left can win on? Security. Is it something where there is a chance to challenge Netanyahu and the right wing? So, Samach, you go first quickly, and then Uri will end.
So I will answer his question, because women can speak about security, and I am Arab woman, so I am the one who will be afraid of. So I am causing the insecurity for them. So it's illusional security issue. We know that Israel the last 3 years did have a war, and now they are cooking something for us the next summer, and with the help of Trump, and we will see that coming. And inside the Israeli society, the 1 million Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, the aggression or any kind of violence from this 20% of the population is almost nothing. It didn't happen. I do think that the statistics say that 65% of the Arab population voted in the last election, even though what's happened with the day of the election, when Netanyahu said that the Arab voters was taking bused by the left-winger and the buses that funded by the New Israel Fund to vote, and so I am the threat of the Israeli democracy. I do think that if the Palestinian residents of Israel vote for at least 80%, we will have more representative. I don't think that the joint list or any, because we have also Arab member in Meretz and another Arab member in the Labour Party, and I count them as representative of the Palestinian inside Israel. I don't see that they are part of the coalition. I do think that if the incredible, wishful thinking lead us to win the election, they will be there, at least as blocking or backing up the left-center coalition. I do think that in one coalition or two, or after like two credential or two, I will really want to see Arab Knesset member in the government, and believe me, like it's now like a dream, but it's gonna happen soon, and it depends of what we are aiming for. It depends on us, and depends of playing the game till the end, and everything and every scenario that we can see have to aim to that point, and this is the obstacle of this dream is only the occupation, because the Arab Knesset member cannot back up or agree for any aggression or any presence of militarism in the Palestinian territory, and this is the key point. I have to say last sentence, because after what I criticized Tamar, and she's one of my friends, but I think that 1 week after her election, when she said that we have to investigate what's happening happening in the border in Gaza against all, the public opinion in Israel, this kind of statement, this kind of position is gathering or engaging the Palestinian population to the left, and I hope that she will dare and other people really, be courage enough to challenge the public or publicity or the right-wing publicity in Israel. Thank you.
Uri, you will finish our discussion, so go ahead.
So I'll start with saying that I do not agree with Samach about the fact that security issues are made up. I once heard that question from an American diplomat stationed in Jerusalem, who said he wasn't sure if it's a real thing that Israelis are really afraid of, or is that a made-up thing. And I knew from his descriptions of his day-to-day life that his family is not allowed to go on public transportation in Jerusalem for years, by the way. I think that for the last 15 years, as far as I know, American diplomats are banned from using public transportation. In Jerusalem, there are like train, let alone buses. So I think that security issues are real. I think that security issues is always issues that come up in elections. Although we haven't had a big military confrontation in the last 3 years, as you said, I think that it still dominates the debate. And I think that for your answer, if it could help a win from the center-left, I think that it can't happen unless they decide that they want to attack on that. And I think that the issue that we are always seeing is that there is a fear to question that issue, and there is a fear to question the issue, is Netanyahu providing security to Israelis, which I believe that the answer is no. And I think that we are in an unfortunate position in which my party leader at the moment, but others as well, don't really believe in their ability to question it. And as long as they don't believe their own ability, then I can't really explain to other people why will they be the correct choice, because it seems that Rabin and Ehud Barak did it, but I think that it does not require you to be Rabin or Ehud Barak or an ex-general. The first thing that I think that a politician needs to have in order to convince other people is to actually believe himself. And I think that it's lacking, maybe.
Well, I just want to I don't underestimate the fear. I know that the fear is there and it's real. The cause of the security thing is for me, it's fake, and statistically it's like the Islamophobia. It's like I'm talking about numbers. I went to a synagogue here in San Francisco through the gates of security that cost like maybe $50,000, and I asked the people there that is something happened in the synagogue, and this man says like 35 years ago one man tried to do something, and for me it's the fear is real, but the rational for the reality is different. So I think if we really want to fix this, we have to think or recover the fear, and that's why places like Waht al-Salam, Neve Shalom, Hand in Hand School are attacked by the tag price wingers, because we are ongoing evidence that Arab and Jewish can be together without fear, and they want to maintain that fear without. In 40 years of existence of Waht al-Salam, Neve Shalom, nobody did something wrong to his neighbors. So, and this is a fact. And we, and one example here and there in mixed cities, like Arab and Jewish in Israel, they are mixed. They are in the same public space. So the fear is there, but the cause or where does this come from? It's come from bad, brutal and incitement from the government for all of us, and we are suffering from that.
Okay, thank you, Samach. And I think, there is so many more things that we could talk about and so many more fascinating questions, but I'm getting some urgent cues that we need to finish the discussion. Thank you so much to our great panelists. Thank you to the crowd for smart questions. I apologize for every time I cut you off, and, I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the conference.